Today we had the Season 7 patch notes and I wanted to summarize them a little bit better than I have in the videos that I made so far because those are very, very long. This video will include most of the changes, leave out some very small, in my opinion, unimportant ones, and I will try to do it in around 10 minutes. We'll see how that goes. If you're wondering why I'm wearing this outfit, it is 32 degrees in this room and I can't open the windows while I'm doing this, so this is gonna be a hot and sweaty run. And with that, let's get started. The first change is to the engine, which will just make Smite a little bit bigger when you download it once, and after that all the fights will be smaller on PC. Upgrade in the long run. Surrendering now works a little bit differently. If you have 3 people surrendering and 1 not voting, then it still counts as a surrender. VGS has an attack the minion command, please use that. In Conquest we see various changes. The first one is there is a new objective being the Jungle Shrine, which gives you extra gold for your team. After clearing some camps, you have to attack that and everyone on the team gets some gold. There are 2 harpies next to Duo Lane, the Alpha Harpies with a lot of health and a decent reward. And the mid camps are also going to get changed, which get a split on the left side near the oracles into 2 small harpy camps on each side. Gives you a little bit less XP, but is less contested. There will be various starting changes to the jungle, meaning the spawn time is adjusted. Primarily a speed buff and void buffs now spawn at 20 seconds, most other buffs at 30 seconds, and most other camps, exception being the mid harpies here. Blue buff gets its MP5 value reduced and now scales with your missing mana. Red buff has got its 5% extra damage or extra power against guards removed. Speed buff gets 10% crowd control reduction, and void buff no longer has the extra protection reduction on multiple targets and percentage reduction, but now adds 10% attack speed and is more interesting for hunters. In Joust we see various new NPCs and everything because the whole map is overhauled. If you want to see that in more detail, feel free to check out the Joust video because there's a lot to go over here that I can't all summarize here. There will be a new player metric in ranked called Variance, which goes along with your MMR and is visible and kind of adjusts how exactly your matches play out, and you will be seeing that in detail in the game, or you can read in detail here. Guardian's Blessing gets a change. Now it no longer relies on sharing minions for its health and mana restore. Instead you get that for being near an ally. That means it's only really viable if you are near an ally and not for solos. Assassin's Blessing gets its damage increased from 35 to 40%, but that is only because various camps get health increases and defense increases, so it doesn't really change much, except for other classes clearing the jungle. There's a new relic for everyone, the Vision Shard that you have at the start of the game in your second relic slot, and you can trade it out after level 12. It comes with a ward that lasts for 1 minute and has a 120-second cooldown. Very interesting, slightly smaller range and no gold reward for clearing it. Hand of the Gods is a new relic that deals 150 true damage to jungle camps, costs 100 gold, sorry, consumable, not a relic, and this gets amplified a little bit more to I think 225 by having Assassin's Blessing, so this can be used for extra secure in the jungle. Potion of Power is now different, especially for physical characters. There's no longer a magical physical version. They're combined into one, and both versions provide some power and 10% CDR, so this is important for physicals. Chalice of Healing and Healing Potions and all that can no longer be stacked simultaneously. They will just stack after each other now, meaning the only pot that you can stack with others is multi-pot now. Mystical Mail gets an overhaul, decreasing its price significantly while decreasing the health on the item, making it a very, very attractive option for solo lane and in general, and I think we'll see a lot more of this item now. Witchblade gets its health slightly increased, making it even more interesting, especially for tankier characters. Sovereignty gets its HP 5 increased, something that I think will make the item a lot more viable, to 35. Tyrannical Plate Helm is the new tier 3 for Dynasty Plate Helm, which loses its pen, and Dynasty Plate Helm becomes a little bit cheaper. Tyrannical Plate Helm is a bit of a weird mix item. It has a lot of power, a little bit of protection and health, a little of crowd control reduction, so overall a mixed item here. And it increases health and attack speed of allied minions, and when an allied minion dies, you get 5 extra power per minion, up to 6 stacks. Very unique, interesting passive, we'll see how it plays out. Stone of Fall has its cost increased from 2,300 to 2,600, and the power increased from 70 to 100. Protections remain the same in cooldown, but it has a completely new passive, and now you gain 20% of the magic protection of the nearby allied guard with the highest magical protections. In other words, usually a solo laner or support. Ring of Hecate is a new item which comes with 80 magical power, 20% attack speed, and 12% life steal for 2,600 gold. And the passive is hitting enemy gods with basic attacks gives you 1 stack of 2% lifesteal stacks up to 5 times. Note this only works on gods, not on minions, so the sustain is not going to be insane from this alone. New item number 2 that we have here is Charon's coin, or number 3. This one costs 2,700 gold, comes with 80 magical power, but 20% magical penetration. We have a general overhaul to penetration, so this is going to be one of the biggest penetration items now. It also has 20 MP5 and a very strange passive. Every time you kill an enemy god or you're assisting an enemy god kill, a coin is flipped, giving you a stack of 7 HP5 or a stack of 2% movement speed. Both can stack up to 4 times. And then after that, if any god is killed and you assist that or kill the god, you get 150 health back over 6 seconds, or you get 5% movement speed for 6 seconds. And you also get 1 gold. Shaman's Ring is removed from the game. Good. Shoes of the Magi gets an overhaul, decreasing the price to 1,550, removing 10 magical penetration, but giving the item 20 extra magical power. This means it's worse for boxing, but it's better for early game clear against minions specifically. Shoes of Focus gets its cost increased from 1,550 to 1,600. Obsidian Shard, again, an entire magical penetration overhaul, but Obsidian Shard in this particular case is the one probably seeing the biggest change. The scaling penetration is entirely removed. Instead, the item will now have flat 20% magical penetration, cost 2,550 gold, quite a lot, and the passive is your first ability gains 10% magical penetration. This can only happen once every 10 seconds. Spear of the Magus also gets a rework. The magical power is increased from 65 to 75. The old passive is entirely removed, and now instead, subsequent hits of the same ability deal 5% increased damage, stacking up to 6 times. From what we know so far, the damage against squishies will be slightly lower with this. Against tankier targets, it will be slightly higher, but only on the dot itself, not on following abilities, so overall this is a nerf. Pythagoras Piece loses its 10% cooldown reduction and gets 10% magical penetration instead. Typhon's Fang gets 10% magical penetration and loses 10 power, still a massive buff. Soul Reaver gets its cost increased from 2,750 to 2,850 and also gets 10% magical penetration. In return, the magical power is decreased from 130 to 110. Staff of Myrden gets 10% magical penetration and loses only 10 power in return, so again a huge buff here. Warlock's Staff gets entirely overhauled. You can see that a little bit in detail here. Now it gets 1 health per stack and 1 magical power per stack up to 75 stacks. Base health is reduced a little bit and the item gets 10% magical penetration. The complete stats are very, very different from before. A lot more power here, 140 power, but only 225 health, 200 mana, and then 10% magical penetration. Spear of Desolation gets its power increased from 100 to 110, just a buff, making this item a lot more interesting with other items being changed as well. Rod of Tahuti gets its power increased from 150 to 160, partially because you have to invest a little bit more into penetration now and can't build as many other high, heavy power items. Soul Gem gets its power increased from 65 to 80, might be a little bit more interesting for some. Polynomical gets its power increased from 75 to 85. Also minor change. Chronos Pendant gets its price decreased from 2,800 gold to 2,700 gold. Very, very interesting. The magical power along with that is increased from 90 to 100. And I think this is going to be a lot more appealing for certain mages now. Telekine's Ring has its magical power increased from 90 to 100, and Restored Artifact, the tier 2 of Chronos Pendant and of Rod of Tahuti, has its price decreased from 1,600 to 1,400, meaning you can buy it at the start of the game. It also has its power increased from 50 to 60, meaning overall you have an item with a lot of MP5 and 60 power at the start of the game, making a very interesting new starting choice. Enchanted Ring gets 10% attack speed and loses 5 magical power, making it a more appealing early choice for magical ADC specifically. Demonic Grip loses 6% protection shred in total. Voidstone gets its passive removed and instead now gives 10% magical protection reduction. It also has its power increased from 20 to 40. And Stone of Binding has its physical and magical protection reduction reduced from 15 to 10, might make it less interesting as a niche aggressive choice. There's a new item called Caduceus Shield or whatever that is specifically the physical version of Rod of Asclepius. Overall has more defensive stat with 35 physical protection, magical protection, and 100 health, but the healing effect is the same just for physicals. Cursed Blade is a new item that makes Toxic Blade and Witchblade accessible. That comes with 75 health and 10% attack speed, 5% movement speed for 1,250 gold. Again, more appealing for those gods that actually use a little bit of attack speed anyways. Gladiator's Shield has its effect nerfed so that if you hit multiple target, it will only proc for 50% on the second and third target and so on. Void Shield has its passive removed as well. The protection is increased from 50 to 60, but the protection reduction on the item itself is now 15% instead, which may be better at later stages in some situations. Silverrange Bow gets its passive increased from 1 power per 0.2 attack speed to 1.5 physical power. We did not quite make 10 minutes, but we're pretty good here. And this will overall mean that it might be more interesting for certain hunters that have those attack speed steroids in late game. Executioner also gets the same change as Demonic Grip, 6% shred lost in total across 3 stacks. Titan's Bane gets a 5% reduction on the bottom end and on the top end for its protection reduction, so this is significantly weakened in my opinion. Hydra's Lament gets its bonus basic attack damage reduced from 50% to 40%, very necessary. Poison Star has its power increased from 20 to 30 by 10. Wind Demon has an extra 5% attack speed. Malice gets 10% cooldown reduction and should definitely be an item that you keep an eye out on because I think it could be very, very interesting on some gods. Soul Eater also very interesting. It gets an additional 5% lifesteal when it's fully stacked, which could mean that it can compete much better with Devourer's Gauntlet on certain ADCs and possibly even with Transcendence. Rangda's Mask loses its 15% penetration and gets 15 power, both physical and magic on stat, meaning overall the item will be much weaker on most gods in my opinion. Odin gets a complete rework. That one is relatively big. His 3 is going to be massively increased in damage and has various different effects that I can't go into in too much detail here. What's worth keeping in mind is he has an AoE effect with a slow and a line effect that can stun and set up his other abilities, which is going to be massive. His ultimate also gets a massive overhaul and can now deal damage if an enemy phantoms or leaps out. The damage will then be up to 420 plus 75% scaling, and the enemy slowed by 25%, so very, very dangerous to jump out of that. You can, however, break walls of the Ring of Spears. That, on the other hand, takes 5 hits, and often in that time you might already be dead by all standards looking at New Odin in general. Bastet also gets a rework. In her case, her passive gets changed. Now you can chase people better with extra movement speed for a while after damaging them. She has a new 3 that throws forward a cat. Slightly lower damage here, but this cat roots the enemy and then will deal its own damage like the old cats and slow the enemy. So overall, your damage output can still be higher. The new ultimate is Guardians of Bast, which amplifies all her abilities and basically gives them AoE effects and gives them multiple instances of damage coming from all sides for a longer duration. Again, something relatively complex that I can't go into much detail here, but this is definitely one to keep an eye out for. Achilles gets his physical power buff decreased by 4% across all ranks because he was just a bit too strong. Artemis gets her Suppress the Instant buff in terms of scaling from 40 to 60%, which is, in my opinion, a pretty significant buff in combination with Silverrange Bow. Baron Samedi has the base damage of his Vivid Gaze increased by 20 on the first rank, and then the highest rank is not changed at all, giving him a little bit of a better early game clear, especially for mid lane. Cu Chulainn gets an extra power per level from Berserk, and Spear of Mortal Pain will give you 26 rage per god hit, meaning 2 to 3 gods should usually be enough to automatically go into rage state, which will make him a lot more effective in many situations. Freya has her passive slightly adjusted, so it doesn't start at 15%, it starts at 10% and then scales up to 15% lifesteal until level 20. Guan Yu has increased base attack speed, and he also gets increased mana per level, which is going to be very interesting not only for his clear, but also in combination with a new healer item that kind of works for him pretty well. And Hades has his his health increased and his health per level increased, making it a little bit closer to a Guardian. And his ultimate now also, on top of his normal defense, gets 10% damage mitigation, making him very, very tanky in the ultimate. Heimdall gets a bunch of nerfs across his physical power scaling in the passive, the scaling on the 1 and the scaling on the ultimate, overall just taking down his damage a notch. The Goddess of Demonetization gets a slight damage increase on a Wing Gust, 5 base damage off every instance, and 5% scaling off every instance. Izanami gets a return projectile damage increased to 35%, meaning a basic attack will in total deal 110% scaling damage, which is very, very interesting. Or like not scaling, but base attack damage, which is very unique. And her Spectral Projection has its cooldown decreased from 16 to 12 to 14 to 12 seconds. Jingwei gets her mobility decreased overall, agility's movement speed buffs in both forms lose 5% each, and Airstrike has its landing range decreased from 55 to 45 units. Nike gets her base HP 5 adjusted and gets some base damage on Rend and Barrier Formation. This is to offset what she once lost in her rework. Ram gets his base movement speed increased. He starts with 5 Astral Arrows now, and Astral Barrage is cheaper in terms of mana, meaning overall he will have a much better time in the early game, and he will also not feel as bad for leveling his ultimate when he doesn't have much mana. So Cat gets a major nerf to the base damage of her Deathbane, I would say. It's an okay nerf at least. 10 off the top here, or 10 off every rank, but you have to keep in mind that it's multiple instances, 3 instances. What's more interesting is Last Breath, which will now have a starting scaling of starting damage of true damage of 500 at max rank, but will scale with 55% of your physical power, meaning tank Circat will deal significantly less damage. For a power heavy Circat, you have to have around 300 power to get the ult damage. So overall, usually this is going to be a nerf, but the damage is still going to be true. Sun Wukong gets an attack speed slow along with a movement speed slow, and his ultimate gets an extra 100 damage when dropping down. Thor gets his ultimate nerfed, and that is in form of a cooldown increase on the early ranks to 110 and then scaling down to 90 seconds. Overall, I would say a good set of changes here. Still quite a few that I personally am missing. I will talk about those in the future, but this should have been in a reasonable time span. I hope this was like around 15 minutes or something. And this is Season 7 so far. Like I said, left out some minor changes. With that, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope this was interesting and insightful. If you're interested in more upcoming content for Season 7 and any Season 7 Smite content in general, feel free to click the sub button and maybe the bell right here, because that's how you get notified of that stuff on my channel. Other than that, see you for the next one tomorrow. ZiSotto, out.